Nearly 2 months of testimony. It took an Idaho jury just 9 hours to recommend the death penalty for convicted killer Chad Daybell. Prosecutors saying the so-called Doomsday author concocted a conspiracy that motivated the ruthless triple murder of his ex-wife and stepchildren.
On June 9, 2020, authorities discovered a horrifying scene in Chad Daybell's backyard. 2 children burned and buried in the family's pet cemetery. Who was responsible? Their parents, turned cult leaders driven by extreme beliefs and greed. This is a tragic tale of lost lives and misguided faith, which ultimately saw justice prevail, offering hope to the grieving families left behind. Chad Daybell ended up on the public radar after he published a series of books titled Living on the Edge of Heaven, Days of Fury, and The Great Gathering. The common theme across all these books was the end times and religion. You see, Chad was a strong believer of humans living multiple lives, and the Holy Ghost meant to lead 144,000 chosen people to God during Christ's second coming.
I tell more about my 2 near-death experiences and how that prompted me to write my novels.
Chad's daily life was largely influenced by his cult-like beliefs, so much so that when he allegedly heard a voice telling him to relocate to Rexburg, Idaho in 2015, he didn't waste a second and packed his bags along with his then-wife, Tammy, in the fall of 2018. It's in Idaho where Chad would meet his next wife and his partner in crime, Lori Vallow. However, she'd been interested in Chad long before she crossed paths with him. Around 2015, Lori picked up Daybell's book, Standing in Holy Places. By 2017 to 2018, she had become a fanatic, reading books about near-death experiences and listening to podcasts by excommunicated Mormons. In a way, these two seemed destined for one another. However, it wasn't until October 2018 that Lori got the chance to meet her hero. That day, she headed to a Prepping a People event with her friends Melanie Gibb and Zulema Pastenis. As she sat in the audience listening to Chad's words, she felt moved. And it seems like Chad was drawn to her as well. According to multiple accounts, these two had a connection. They met up afterward, and Chad talked to Lori about living 31 lives and possessing the rare ability to see whether people were light or dark. How did he see Lori? Well, he believed that she was an eternal being who had lived 21 lives. While the jury's still out on that, we do know that Lori had been married 4 times before, each of which ended in divorce. She shared daughter Tylee with her former husband, Joseph Ryan. And at the time she met Chad, she was married to Charles Vallow, with whom she shared JJ, who was in fact Charles's grandnephew. As time went by, the bond between Chad and Lori only grew stronger. Some of those close to them dismissed it as harmless flirting, completely unaware that their relationship would consume the lives of everyone around them. By February 2019, Lori was completely taken over by Daybell's cult beliefs. She informed her husband at the time that she no longer cared about him or JJ, and proceeded to disappear from the face of the earth for 58 days. But Charles had bigger things to worry about. That month, he filed for divorce. The reason? Multiple threats to his life, the theft of his truck, and the theft of a total of $35,000 from the pair's joint bank accounts. According to Charles, Lori had gotten off the rails and needed to be admitted to a psychiatric hospital. She kept going on about how he had been taken over by a dark spirit called Ned Schneider, and that she was a god meant to take on the work of 144,000 at Christ's second coming. Lori believed that it would go down in July 2020. But what really had Charles concerned was she threatened to kill him if he made the mistake of getting in her way. Police heard out Charles' concerns but didn't take any action.
Threatened me, murder me, kill me.
She threatened to murder you?
Yes.
And she's talking in a spiritual.
A fatally wrong decision that Charles would later pay for with his life. On July 11, 2019, Vallow went to pick up his son JJ from Lori's home, as he usually did, completely unaware of what was to come. Also present at his home was Lori's brother Alex Cox, who police later found held the same cult beliefs as Lori. Words were exchanged between the two parties, and one thing led to another, which ended with Cox fatally shooting Charles. Interestingly, he'd be the person to call the authorities later.
Emergency.
I shot my brother-in-law.
However, Alex's claims about the shooting going down 5 minutes before the 911 call were later proven to be false.
He was talking with my sister earlier.
No, what happened today, though? Like, just in the last 20 minutes?
He came at me with a bat.
At the time, police chose not to investigate Charles' passing further. Maybe if they had, they could have saved young Tylee and JJ from a gruesome fate. Though the chapter was closed, Lori ended up on the authorities' radar after they found that she had told her son's school lies about his passing. Apparently, she'd been going around telling them that JJ's dad had taken his own life.
The whole day he kept saying, "My dad's not dead. My dad's not in heaven. My dad's just traveling. He's not in heaven."
Still, Lori's questionable activities failed to alert authorities of the dangers that lay ahead, particularly her children. With Charles out of the picture, the kids were left at their mother's mercy. By the end of August, Lori moved to Rexburg, Idaho with them. Was this the start of her heinous plan? No one knows except that Tylee was last seen alive and well on September 8, 2019, playing around at Yellowstone National Park along with the family. Meanwhile, JJ was last spotted alive on September 23, 2019, in footage captured by a doorbell camera. That day, he also attended Rexburg's Kennedy Elementary School. But the next day, JJ's teachers received a strange call from his mom. She informed the school that he would no longer be taking classes. Instead, he would receive homeschooling. Though concerned, the school was not in a position to do anything. And so Tylee and JJ were cut off from the world. Months went by with loved ones not seeing a trace of the two kids, and Lori and Daybell moved to other victims on their list. In February 2019, Chad told his neighbors Todd and Alice Gilbert that he had a vision predicting his wife Tammy would die before her 50th birthday. They brushed off his words as those of a religious fanatic, completely unaware of what the future held for an unexpecting Tammy. Chad proceeded to carry out his sinister plans on October 9, 2019. That day, Tammy reported about being shot at in her driveway by a masked man. She thought that it was only a paintball gun. However, she never found out if the culprit meant to harm her since the gun appeared unloaded. As he failed to fire despite pulling the trigger several times, police dismissed it as a prank. But was it really an innocent mistake or a botched murder attempt? A prank seems out of the question since 10 days later, Tammy was found dead at her home. Chad, her dutiful husband, claimed that she had gone to bed with a terrible cough and died in her sleep inexplicably. Despite no proof at all in her medical records, he cited low blood pressure, seizures, and reactions to homeopathic medicines. Why did no one question these inconsistencies at the time? After Tammy's death, Chad received $430,000 in life insurance payouts. Initially, her body was not autopsied because Chad refused to sign off. But an autopsy after her exhumation revealed she had been choked to death by someone. The results of the autopsy did not come to light until the trial. What's also interesting is that police were able to place Alex's phone near the Daybell's residence 4 hours before Tammy was shot at. They also found that the culprit armed with a paint gun was actually Alex Cox with an AR-15. Unfortunately, Tammy wasn't the last one to suffer at Daybell's hands. On October 2, 2019, Brandon Boudreaux, the husband of Lori's niece Melanie, was driving home in Gilbert, Arizona, when he had shots fired at him. Fortunately, fate seemed to be on Brandon's side, as the bullet missed his head by mere inches. Even better, in the chaos, he had noticed the Jeep where the shots came from. To Brandon, it looked a lot like the one Tylee used to have. As the Jeep made its getaway, Brandon noted down the license plate number and gave it to the authorities, who later identified it as belonging to the late Charles Vallow. Brandon knew about the pair's cult activities because his wife Melanie was a believer as well. He believed that his aunt Lori Vallow's cult was the reason Melanie was insistent on the divorce. But after the shooting, Brandon had more concerning realizations. By now, it had been a while since he had seen the kids, and deep down, he felt like if anyone knew where they'd be, it'd be her cult parents. And so in February 2020, Brandon went to the authorities to make things right. He claimed that the attack on his life was arranged to bag the insurance money. He also believed that Lori's brother Cox was behind the shooting, and he pointed the authorities to Melanie to sort out the case of the missing kids. And so with Brandon's claims, police sought to investigate the matter. Alex, Chad, and Lori might have been religious fanatics, but they were no criminal masterminds. Police were able to quickly place Cox near Brandon's home somewhere around the time the shooting took place. Meanwhile, JJ's grandmother and Charles' sister, Kay Vallow Woodcock, was worried sick by the disappearance of her grandson.
And I'll do it again. Where are the children? Where are the children? Where are the children?
And so she called for a welfare check on November 25, 2019. Police dropped by Lori's place in Rexburg. Though Lori was not at home, Alex and Chad were present, and their strange behavior sounded off alarm bells. Alex claimed that the kids were with his grandmother. Meanwhile, Chad claimed that he was only a friend of Lori's. However, their lies failed to work and instead landed them in more trouble. 1, the officers were there on behalf of JJ's grandmother. 2, police were well aware of how Chad had tied the knot with Lori only 2 weeks after the passing of their partners. The suspicion surrounding the two grew when Melanie Gibb, Lori's friend, reported receiving a disturbing call from Lori, asking her to tell the police that JJ was with her. However, Melanie had no plans to help out her friend, especially after she'd heard the way Lori would talk about her son.
Said that he had turned into a zombie the day before I got there. And she was pointing out behaviors of his, like, look how he's doing this, that's unusual, or look how he's doing.
With the police turning up dead ends, they decided to call for the public's help in locating the kids on December 20th. The next day, the police announced Chad and Lori as persons of interest in the case, given their refusal to cooperate with the authorities. And just like that, these two ended up in the national spotlight. While the kids' grandparents and the nation were worried sick about the kids' safety, the couple failed to show any concern. On January 25, 2020, authorities tracked down Lori and Chad in Kauai and asked them to physically produce Tylee and JJ to the Idaho Department of Welfare or the Rexburg Police Department in 5 days. But even a court order failed to shake the couple. Instead, they continued to hide out, leaving investigators no choice but to arrest Lori in Hawaii on February 20th, 2020. She was brought back to Idaho on March 5th. With his wife in prison, Chad followed in her footsteps. He tried to get her out by putting the house up for sale, but it didn't work out. As for the kids, well, they weren't discovered until June 9th. That day, police came upon a horrific scene in the backyard of Chad Daybell's home. Human remains probably burned and buried along with the remains of Chad's pets. Here's what the official report from the incident reads.
Initially, as soon as they removed the paneling, I could smell the odor of a decomposing body. Once they removed some soil, there was a black, what I can best describe as a black plastic bag with a round object protruding through the dirt. Okay.
The day he had apparently burned Lori's children and buried their bodies, he had sent a rather disturbing text to his wife Tammy, which the FBI uncovered. Police were able to use this text and location of Cox's phone to locate the pet cemetery that Chad hinted at in the text. He watched the investigators dig up evidence of his crimes while sitting in a vehicle in front of the driveway. And the minute they found JJ's remains, he made a break for it, knowing that his time had come. However, fate was done favoring him as he was arrested about a mile from his home for obstruction or concealment of evidence. And with his bail set at $1 million, his fate was sealed. In Chad and Lori's eyes, they had gotten away with the perfect crime or crimes. But as they faced the trial, they understood there was no escaping the justice system. On November 9, 2023, Daybell's legal team filed 3 motions to get the prosecution to drop the death penalty from his murder trial. His reasoning? But prosecutors crushed any hope that Chad was holding onto for leniency. The trial commenced on April 10, 2024, with his lawyers saying in his opening statement, despite the evidence stacking up against him, Chad tried desperately to escape what was coming. On May 16th, his team filed a motion for dismissal after an indictment incorrectly set the date of JJ's passing as September 8th through 9th, 2019, instead of September 22nd through 23rd. But what Chad failed to realize is that there was no light at the end of the tunnel for him. For over a month, the defense and the prosecution laid down their evidence, and finally, on May 31st, 2024, the jury sat down to sentence Chad for his crimes and bring justice to those who lost their lives at his hands. But how do you punish a man like Daybell? What kind of sentence did the severity of his actions beg? Members of the jury struggled to answer these questions, and so they sat together for over 6 hours together over the course of 2 days to come up with the most severe punishment for Chad.
He said, okay, got a column, it's a Chad column. Are there any pluses in there? And we went around the room, no, 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 no.
In their final verdict, the jury deemed Chad guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy in the deaths of Tammy, Tylee, and JJ. They also found him guilty of insurance fraud in the case of Tammy's death. And so, in light of the jury's verdict, Judge Stephen Boyce sentenced Chad to death for 3 counts of murder and 3 counts of conspiracy, and 15 years in prison each for 2 counts of insurance fraud, bringing an end to a long struggle for justice for the victims' families. And so the curtain falls on Chad Daybell's dark chapter. We remember the innocent lives lost and hope for healing for the grieving families. May their souls rest in peace, and may justice bring solace.